Contemplation before chanting. The Sangha is invited to come back to our breathing so that the collective energy of mindfulness will bring us together as an organism, going as a river with no more separation. Let the whole Sangha breathe as one body, chant as one body, listen as one body, transcending the boundaries of a delusive self, liberating us from the superiority complex, the inferiority complex, and the equality complex.
From the depths of understanding, a flower of great endless bloom, the Bodhisattva stands majestically.
Dear beloved teacher, dear community, can everybody hear me? Okay, great. So welcome to this session on the 5 mindfulness trainings and global ethics. My name is Valerie Brown, and with me is Sister Tay. So we'd like to begin with 2 questions. It's sort of to carry on what questions that Richard posed to you yesterday. So the first question is about inspiration, and the second question is about aspiration. And you have in front of you a card. On one side, inspiration, on the other side, aspiration. So here's the question on inspiration. We'd like to invite you to bring to mind a teacher, a mentor, a friend, a colleague, somebody that you know that inspired you, who inspired you to learn. We'd like you to focus on the qualities that person embodied. Maybe their compassion, their understanding, their listening. So that's the inspiration question. And then the second question is the question on aspiration. And the question is, why did you go into this field of education in the first place? Why did you become a teacher, an educator? Why did you go into this field? What was your aspiration? So we'd like to give you 5 minutes of quiet time for yourself to just reflect on those 2 questions, the question of inspiration and aspiration.
If there's anyone who does not have a pen or pencil, you can raise your hand and we can pass you one.
So we have 2 helpers who are passing out cards, Ellie and John. If you need a pencil or a card, just raise your hand, please.
When we call to mind the qualities of the person who inspired us, try to be as specific as you can in identifying that quality, that virtue that touched you. Okay, maybe one more minute. Thank you, everybody. Dear respected Tay, dear noble community, today is July 29, 2016. We are on the third day of our educators retreat at Blue Cliff Monastery. So we'd like to ask you to put aside your aspiration and inspiration card for now. We're planting that as a seed for later on. We will reference it later on in our sharing. I'd like to begin by sharing with you how I came into the practice and became a nun. I was in my early 20s when I began looking for a spiritual path, because there was a lot of yearning in me to offer, to contribute to the world, but I didn't know how. And that was part of my suffering, not being able to find a real way to let my heart speak. So I began looking into different spiritual traditions to answer some of my questions and to find a way to unblock myself. My parents, who met Tay in the 60s, introduced me to his teachings, and I was lucky enough to attend a public talk and began going to a retreat similar to this one. And I will never forget the first time I encountered the Sangha. It was at a public talk, and I saw the Sangha, the monastics, sitting on stage with Tay. And Tay's sharing about the simple life, the path of liberation and freedom really resonated with me. And I began to read Tay's books. And for the first time, I felt alive. I felt like compassion, that kind of desire to do well, to offer to the world, was something that was really alive in this community. And so for the first time, I touched compassion, a living compassion, and it drew me to the Sangha. So I continued to seek ways to be in touch with the Sangha, to be in touch with the practice, sitting by myself, sitting with different communities, and coming to retreats. I think it was my second retreat that I took the 5 mindfulness trainings, because it was a very concrete way of lifting into my awareness mindfulness. And I remember my parents being a little bit upset at me because I took the 5 mindfulness trainings before they did. They introduced me to the practice, but I kind of kept moving on. And so they said, "Why didn't you wait for us to take it all together?" And I said, "You can still take it, no problem." Right? So I continued to practice as a layperson. And I had the opportunity to visit Plum Village and really embed myself in the community to see if monastic life was a good fit for me and if I was a good fit for the community. And as you can see, it was, and so that's why I'm here 16 years later. So it was that coming into contact with something alive and real, the compassion that I felt embodied in the community, that was what brought me to the practice. It was so beautiful. And this is what continues to inspire me to live in community and practice as a Sangha. Because whatever peace and happiness that we touch when we come to visit a monastery, it's all founded on our practice of mindfulness as embodied in the mindfulness trainings. As monastics, we have our precepts, for the sisters, 348 precepts, but they are all, if you distill it, it is the 5 mindfulness trainings. So it's that living quality of mindfulness that we would like to invite you together to explore with us now as we look into the 5 mindfulness trainings. Our teacher often calls our way of life an art. It's something that we practice, we do, we live, we walk. It's not something that we take up to use like a tool, but it's something that we strive to embody. The peace and happiness that we touch here is because we practice according to the 5 mindfulness trainings as a community. And so this is one of our cornerstones, our foundations of peace and happiness. When we ask you who inspires you, the question asks us, what are we inspired by, and to do what? And for me, inspiration is to live more deeply, to touch something true in myself, to open my heart. And a mindful way of life is that very thing that opens our heart to explore, to expand our boundaries beyond what is our comfort level, beyond what is our current present knowledge, allows us to live in a more holistic, inclusive way. And in the end, it really is a path to realize the insight of interbeing that we heard about yesterday. Do you remember when Sister Huang Yim and Richard were sharing about interbeing? It's our teacher is a wordsmith, so interbeing is his way of sharing the deep insight of non-self and impermanence. And when we can touch and realize that in our daily life, we're in a very firm place for our peace and happiness. Why? Because we are inclusive, because we are holistic, because we are larger than our limited selfish self. So the 5 mindfulness trainings are really a very concrete way of living mindfully. It is the way that we concretize our path, our spiritual path.
Dear beloved teacher, dear community, again, my name is Valerie Brown, and I'd like to share just a tiny bit about how I came to this community before we turn to the reading of the 5 mindfulness trainings and then go into more in-depth with the trainings. So, my background is as an attorney and a lobbyist. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and like many people of color, I grew up with a lot of violence and a lot of poverty, so I did a lot of running. And I ran from Brooklyn, and Brooklyn, I can assure you, was not the swanky place it is today. There were no yoga studios or latte shops or nothing like that. But I ran right into the arms of undergraduate school, and then from undergraduate school to graduate school, and graduate school to law school, and law school to the bar exam. And represented as a lobbyist educational institutions. So I represented boards of trustees, college presidents, school boards, litigating for them in adversarial situation, and then also as a lobbyist to advocate for their interest at Congress and in the state legislature. And my life was my work, very stressful work, very stressful job, a lot of high pressure, as you might suspect. And two things happened that I'd like to share with you is one day I went to hear a talk given by our teacher. I didn't know much about Thich Nhat Hanh. And virtually everything that Thai said was the opposite of the way I was living. And I said, "What's the matter with him?" So you can hear the utter arrogance and the cluelessness with which I was living, but that was my life. So it was a lot of suffering, a lot of running. But I came to a moment of stopping, and that changed many things. So like many people, when we're stressed, we decide we're going to go on a vacation, right? And the vacation will cure everything. So I did that. I went to one of my favorite places. That was in New Mexico, northern New Mexico. And I went with a group, and we climbed high up to the top of a mountain. And when we got to the top of the mountain, I took off my backpack, and I unwrapped my cheese sandwich, and I was sitting on a log, and I looked up at the sky. And I think for the first time, I noticed that the clouds moved. Now, I know you're going to say that's ridiculous. Of course clouds move in the sky. But what I'm pointing to is that I was so alienated from the natural world, alienated from my body, alienated from other people, that I had forgotten that clouds move in the sky. And that was the start of a turn, like steering the Queen Mary, very gradual change in my life. I started sitting with the local Sangha and fell in love with the practices. I saw that they were helping me in how I speak to other people, how I actually did my work rather than sending an email that was filled with anger. I would breathe. I would think about the person to receive the email, how that person might feel. And so tiny little adjustments I made because of these trainings that we'll share with you. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you, Valerie. So we are going to visit a number of the 5 mindfulness trainings. Because time is short, we will focus in our discussion. We wanted to focus on a few of them in particular to bring them out for this particular retreat. And so before each training, we will hear it read, and then we'll ask our bell master to keep an eye on the clock for us, about 15 minutes per when we begin sharing, and to give us an invite at minute 13 so we can wrap up. Okay. So we'll begin with the first mindfulness training, Reverence for Life, and we invite you to follow along the text. You may notice it's colored in different ways, and just to allow it to come more deeply into your consciousness to read along as it's read. Thank you.
The first mindfulness training, Reverence for Life. Aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I am committed to cultivating the insight of interbeing and compassion and learning ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. I am determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to support any act of killing in the world, in my thinking, or in my way of life. Seeing that harmful actions arise from anger, fear, greed, and intolerance, which in turn come from dualistic and discriminative thinking, I will cultivate openness, non-discrimination, and non-attachment to views in order to transform violence, fanaticism, and dogmatism in myself and in the world.
So again, and over again, we will come across this emphasis on interbeing. And being present, being attentive. So please be aware of this. Whenever we come across that term, let it go deep into you when we cover the 5 mindfulness trainings, because that is the ground, that is the direction, and that is also the way of these mindfulness trainings. It is a way of realizing this very deep insight of interbeing. Now, in Reverence for Life, we know that it is a training to move us in the direction of non-violence, non-harm. But for this retreat, we would like to bring it closer to home and really focus on the building blocks of our peace and happiness, self-care. So when we talk about honoring life, protecting and supporting life, first of all, we are including ourselves in that wide sphere. Valerie said that for the first time she touched nature. And so this is, in a way, an invitation to see ourselves as part of this bigger sphere, this part of nature that we have made a commitment to protect. So at its heart, Reverence for Life is to support and protect life. And not only to support and protect life, but to do it in a non-violent way, right? Because there are many ways to protect life. There are very violent ways. There are very effective ways, short-term, to get what we want, to protect our territory, our land, our space, our ideas. But they're not peaceful. So at its heart, it's supporting and protecting in a non-violent way. And secondly, when we look at this training, it's asking us to explore our relationship with our thoughts and feelings. We know that our actions don't come out of nowhere, but they stem from how we feel and how we think. From our thoughts and our feelings, we react physically. And so when we talk about protecting life out there, it really has to do with how we protect our own senses from the injury that we often do ourselves, from our own thoughts, the way we handle our emotions, our feelings.
A key word that Sister Taya has brought up is a non-violence. So one of the things I know, I just wrote a book about mindfulness and school leadership. So I had the chance to interview many, many people all over the world. And in participating in the Barcelona retreat in 2014 and the first educators retreat here, we listened to what educators said, and what we heard people say over and over again is a form of violence, in that busyness, overwhelm as the new normal, and stress, right? As well as complexity and ambiguity. These are things that we, as educators, as professionals, deal with every day. So I'd like to suggest some practices, concrete practices that people that I interviewed for the book actually said that they did, and that I've tried for myself. My father just recently passed away, and he died in May, and he was buried in June. So it's still all very fresh for me. And one of the things that I'm very aware of is that every day counts. No day is wasted. And by that I mean there's so much negativity in the world that it is critical that we replace those negative thoughts with positive affirmations. And that is the practice of mindfulness. When one is facing great overwhelm, I have many principals, assistant principals that I work with who say, I don't have 5 minutes to practice mindfulness. But we do breathe in and we do breathe out all day long. And maybe the practice is much simpler. Maybe it's just being aware of breathing in, or just being aware of breathing out, and see what happens. The practice of scheduling a bio break. We know we're swept away by busyness, and so for our own sake, it's critical to put on our schedule that we take a break. So I actually have a principal that I know that schedules on her calendar 5 minutes, close the door, take out the yoga mat, which means the yoga mat is in the car and in the office, and rest for 5 minutes. So these are practices, concrete practices, tiny practices that we can use to permeate the day and bring mindfulness.
So self-care comes in a very concrete form. From Valerie's sharing, we can see, first of all, that we have to be present. We have to train our mind to be present for our body, and train our mind to be present for thoughts and feelings that come up through these basic practices. And what does that give us? What kind of gifts does that give us? It gives us space so that we don't react, but we really experience and able to take care of things as they come up. Often we come to the practice because we're suffering first. Like we go to the hospital when we've broken a leg, right? And that's when we first become aware that, wow, I had 2 working legs before. But we don't have to wait until there's an overt injury to begin on this path of healing and nourishment. So being aware, giving space and time to check in with our body is, first of all, to be aware that it's there. Secondly, to be aware when things are a little off-kilter. Many of us ignore aches and pains until it's a bit late, and then it becomes a full-blown issue. I have dental issues like that. Right? But mindfulness practice moves us in the direction of more minute, moment-to-moment awareness so that we can navigate our body, navigate our emotions in a more peaceful way, not in a problem-solving, resolution-finding way, but just checking in. Okay? So the first mindfulness training, yes, it covers all beings, right? We have a commitment to protect and support life. But when we talk about our own support, we're looking at making space in our daily schedule, in our house, space so that we can touch base with our body, our mind, making time in our schedule, and having the right attitude towards ourselves. We are not a problem to be solved. We are a universe to be explored. And that gentle approach of mindfulness allows us to see the things that are good and see the things that maybe need some improvement without judgment. And gently we unfold, gently we transform.
The one thing I would add as well, this is largely about self-care, and self-care is not selfish. It is really the preservation of one of our greatest assets, ourselves, in a non-violent way. And I think this is particularly challenging for women because we are always taking care of other people. So to prioritize our own self-care.
So why do we do this? We practice because interbeing. We know we take care of ourselves. It means we're taking care of our family. We're taking care of our students. We're taking care of society by doing our part. Now we'd like to move on to the second mindfulness training. I'm sorry, the fourth mindfulness training, right? The fourth mindfulness training.
The fourth mindfulness training, loving speech and deep listening. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to others, I am committed to cultivating loving speech and compassionate listening in order to relieve suffering and to promote reconciliation and peace in myself and among other people, ethnic and religious groups and nations. Knowing that words can create happiness or suffering, I am committed to speaking truthfully using words that inspire confidence, joy, and hope. When anger is manifesting in me, I am determined not to speak. I will practice mindful breathing and walking in order to recognize and to look deeply into my anger. I know that the roots of anger can be found in my wrong perceptions and lack of understanding of the suffering in myself and in the other person. I will speak and listen in a way that can help myself and the other person to transform suffering and see the way out of difficult situations. I am determined not to spread news that I do not know to be certain and not to utter words that can cause division or discord. I will practice right diligence to nourish my capacity for understanding, love, joy, and inclusiveness, and gradually transform anger, violence, and fear that lie deep in my consciousness.
There are many reasons that we choose the avenue of communication, of speaking our mind. And again, sometimes it is not a peaceful way. We may be motivated to prove our point, to push our way, our opinion. We may be motivated to shut someone down with our speech. We may be motivated by energies that don't allow us a peaceful mind, an open heart. So the fourth mindfulness training about communication invites us to explore what is the function of communicating, of listening deeply, of mindful speaking. And when we boil it down, the reason we communicate is to foster a deeper understanding in ourselves and the other person, to offer support through our words. It's a kind of action of the mouth, to offer support or to ask for support, and to connect with someone. Yesterday in the talk, Richard shared with us that wonderful exercise where we explored each other's hands. And there were many things that I took away from that exercise, but simply the connection was already very nourishing. So these are wholesome motivations for us to express, to communicate. We can also listen violently. We can listen in order to find fault, right? To have a scorecard, to judge and say, yes, no, they're wrong, they are so wrong, for example. And then there are more wholesome ways of listening deeply. The Buddha has given us some concrete guidelines to let us know when we are listening and speaking mindfully. I'd like to ask you if you can share with me what are the hallmarks of skillful speech? What is one hallmark of skillful speech? Yes?
Owning your feelings instead of blaming the other person for them.
Non-blame, okay. What else? Just think of when you've received skillful speech, what other ways can we touch that? Yes? Yes? Do no harm, right. Something that is beneficial, okay? Just write these down. So skillful speech is beneficial, it's not harmful. What else? Yes? Non-judgmental, right. So it's beneficial in that it doesn't harm the other person with negativity. Yes? Speaking with care. I'm going to say gentle, okay? Gentle speech. Speech that doesn't, in its energy, do harm. Beneficial can mean beneficial in terms of its content or also its form.
What was the last word you said?
Something very elementary. What is, yes? So, truth, right? Something that is true. True speech. There's two more. Yes, brother?
Not authoritative or forcing.
Gentle, yes, we have. Gentle.
It's open, so you're not forcing your view. It's different than gentle. So it's kind of not from a place of authority or pushing your agenda onto the group or the person. Humility.
Humble, okay. I won't write that down just because it's not the official one, but for sure that's something that is skillful. Yes? Empathetic, yeah. Y'all come in with good ones, but they're not on the list, so I have to not write them down.
Sister, at the right time.
Timely, thank you, yes. Timely. And the last one? Harmonious. Not trying to find a better word. It comes from within. Okay, I'll give it to you. With good intention. Right? So this is what the Buddha taught as skillful speech. And further, we know that right speech, which is one very key element of mindful communication, is speech that is true, speech that is not divisive, speech that is not idle, and speech that is not harsh. Okay. So through these lenses, we have a chance to look at our daily speech, the way we naturally converse with our friends, our family, our colleagues, and to look a little bit more closely to see, does it foster understanding? Does it really offer them support? Does it really foster connection? Or is it just out of our habit energy, our emotion, negative emotions that we react and speak from something that maybe we inherited from our mom and dad, right?
So I can share a concrete example of this practice. And for me, the essence of this practice is the word that Sister Trubel has written on the board, presence, the practice of presence. As I mentioned, my work for many years was as a lobbyist, as an attorney. And so in law school, we don't learn these things, to be gentle, to be truthful. We learn to win, you know. That's the focus is on winning, getting it right. But the job of a lobbyist is the job of influencing another person. And generally, it's to influence the person to do something that they would not otherwise do. And so that is the job of a lobbyist, to persuade and to influence another person. And so I trained myself with this practice. This was probably my number one practice, was this training. And what I would do each time I had a conversation, my job, I represented a big organizations. Every time I had to have a conversation with a senator, for example, just picture this. We're in the hall of the Congress, marble everywhere, in nice clothes, not in these robes, not that they're not nice, but you know, in a business suit, right? And I'm having a conversation with a senator, trying to persuade this person. What I would do is I would feel my body and feel my feet in my shoes and then feel the floor. And I would focus on my breathing and the words that the other person was saying to me. And sometimes, very often, the words would be adversarial because that is the nature. I would notice and name the emotions as they are arising. So I would name, this is anger arising. This is anxiety arising. I would notice and name it, and I would notice my face feeling flush, my heart beating. And then I would switch from noticing and naming very gently. The person is not aware of what's happening. This is all internal. It's taking maybe 5 seconds. I would focus on the person that I'm having the conversation with and take a genuine interest in that person. And instead of making a declarative sentence to that person, I would switch it. I would ask the person an open question. A question like, talk about why you feel that way. Can you say more about the decision that you've come to? I'm really interested in hearing, how did it get like that? And in asking the open question, that creates space. The person feels heard. It changes the dynamic of the relationship from adversarial. The person then wants to share. They see that I am taking an interest in them. And so it switches the relationship from being adversarial to being collaborative, cooperative. And that is the basis for understanding. And it's the basis for trust. And so this has been a practice I've done hundreds and hundreds every single day in every conversation at work, and then I moved the practice not just from work, but into my daily life with other people. So again, I would say that the focus here is to create a greater connection, which then leads to greater understanding, which generates trust. And with trust, we can affect change. We can influence people. We don't need to argue or fight, but that's a path.
We'd also like to invoke again that inner teacher within each one of us. And practicing the mindful speech and deep listening is a way that we can actively nurture that inner teacher within each one of us. Valerie was sharing in some of our discussions about how in the educational field, oftentimes people are in an advisory position. They have to play that role, or they feel they have to play that role. They're the decision maker, they're the arbiter, the problem solver. And sometimes time is tight, and we get into that mode of problem solving. But this goes against the grain of nurturing that inner teacher within our colleagues, our family, and especially our students. So to train to have that openness, to be able to ask open questions that are wise questions that guide, but also invite the other person to touch their inner wisdom, is so very important. In the monastery, luckily we have a schedule. We have practices that help us to touch this regularly. Yesterday we learned about beginning anew. How we can speak in such a way that allows people to hear, to take away from our sharing, and to gain a deeper insight into the situation. We learn how we can listen more deeply so that we don't come from a place of judgment and closed-mindedness, but really, again, touch that inner wisdom that allows us to interbe with the other person, not be in a place of defensiveness, not be in a place of aggressiveness or offensiveness, but to honor their inner teacher, to honor our inner teacher, and to cohabitate in that space.
So as you can see, the practice is both speaking and listening. Listening being a hugely underrated practice and skill, and that this is not a passive endeavor, but rather as an active endeavor. That listening in this way, we listen with our entire body, we listen with our heart to feel, with our eyes to see, with the hands, with our gut. It's a fully engaged practice.
Thank you. There's so much more that can be said about this one, but in the interest of time, we'll move on now to the 5th mindfulness training, Nourishment and Healing Consumption.
The fifth mindfulness training, Nourishment and Healing. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption, I am committed to cultivating good health, both physical and mental, for myself, my family, and my society by practicing mindful eating, drinking, and consuming. I will practice looking deeply into how I consume the 4 kinds of nutriments, namely edible foods, sense impressions, volition, and consciousness. I am determined not to gamble or to use alcohol, drugs, or any other products which contain toxins, such as certain websites, electronic games, TV programs, films, magazines, books, and conversations. I will practice coming back to the present moment to be in touch with the refreshing, healing, and nourishing elements in me and around me, not letting regrets and sorrow drag me back into the past, nor letting anxieties, fear, or craving pull me out of the present moment. I am determined not to try to cover up loneliness, anxiety, or fear, or other suffering by losing myself in consumption. I will contemplate interbeing and consume in a way that preserves peace, joy, and well-being in my body and consciousness, and in the collective body and consciousness of my family, my society, and the earth.
Again, we touch interbeing, that the way we consume has a direct influence on the well-being of our family, our friends, society, the way we spend our time, the way we use resources, the way we invest our energies. It's not just our individual happiness, but it's something that affects those around us very directly. So in the 5th mindfulness training, Nourishment and Healing, it speaks of consumption, and our teacher, Tai, has emphasized that this is a very important training. It gets at the heart of our basic well-being. You'll note that there are different ways we consume. This is an invitation to explore, how do we consume through our senses? How do we eat with our eyes? The physical food that we put in our ears, our body, the thoughts that we hear, that we ruminate on. And it invites us to ask the question, first of all, of what it is that we consume, how we use our time, how we use our free time. When we explore how we use our free time, it really gets at our habit energies. I think of it as downtime. So anything that's not work, let's put it in the category of downtime. How do you use your downtime? It's the space where you kind of relax into, right? It's the space where you have certain habits arise, your go-to comforts, whether it's the sense of the eye or the sense organ of the mouth, the sense organ of the mind. So first of all, to explore how free we are in consuming, I'd like to invite you to take up the card that has the circle on it. We're going to do a small exercise, and please turn it to the one that says free time. I'm going to ask you to visualize your week. So our time frame is a week. And think of the time that you allot for free time, your downtime, your non-work time. And you can even quantify that. How much free time do you have in a week? If it's easier for you to do in a day, you can do in a day. So see, these are some questions that we're going to ask ourselves. What do we do in our free time? how much of it do we do? Meaning how much time or how much ice cream we eat or how much time do we use to eat it? How often do we do it? Do we check our email twice a day or 10 times a day? Going more inward, in what spirit do we engage in this activity? And finally, the golden question is why? Why do we do that? Why? So we'd like to give you a few minutes just to look at your pie and how do you divide up your free time? Is it going to the movies, talking with friends, study, reading, shopping, hiking? And this is your card. This is your card, so you can be as honest as you want. Do you spend your time resting? A common complaint is that we don't have enough time to live, not enough time to do what we really want or need to do. And this exercise helps us to see exactly how much time do we have and do we spend it wisely. It helps us to see what our habits are. What is our go-to activity? It helps us to see what our habits value in our life, right? Because obviously if we spend a lot of time on one thing and very little on another, it means we put more weight that has either a bigger hold on us, or we put more weight on it, we value it. So these questions also help us to see when we touch consumption from a place that is getting to be a little bit obsessive, a little bit in the realm of addictive. Okay, so I'd like to ask you to continue this because this is a deeper exploration than we have time for here. But just to take note that when we look at our free time and how we use it through the lens of this mindfulness training, we get to explore what our emotions, what our emotional landscape is like. It gets to that question of in what spirit do we do things and why? Are we hiding from something? What are we hiding from? And even more importantly, it gives us an opportunity to ask us, is this activity really nourishing our deeper aspiration? Is it in accord with our deeper aspiration? And so please take a look right now at your aspiration that you wrote down. that aspiration that you had when you first entered the education field, or the one that has been evolving and developed now as you've been in the field for a while. This aspiration, is it at odds with, or is it in harmony with the way we use our free time? These are questions for us to continue to explore.
So, so this is a very important reflection, and maybe there's an aha moment for you in all of this, which would be wonderful. Working with many school administrators, principals, and school leaders, we know that sometimes eating and food, which is sometimes the heart of this training, is often an obsession, or it's the opposite. It's an afterthought. We don't even think about eating. But I'd like to just share a tiny little story about transforming with this particular training. So I mentioned that I grew up in Brooklyn with a lot of violence and a lot of poverty, and did a lot of running, and much of it was much of the root of that came from my father and from the relationship I had with him, and much violence with him in his life. So much so I didn't know him. I didn't even know his mother's name. I had left home at a very early age and set off. And after a divorce, after a crisis in my life, I decided that this area in my life held the key, understanding him. And I wrote him a letter, very similar to the letter that we wrote here yesterday, and just ask him about himself, to understand him, understand his life. And it was through that letter, and then understanding him, how he grew up, that I was able to transform a lot of my suffering. So my addiction was to a lot of anger, a lot of violence, and it was part of the culture, the norm of what I had grown up in. And it really was through understanding my father and his own history of violence that I was able to shift some of that.
So Valerie brought up eating, and we'd like to invite you to look at these two areas in particular. How do you eat in a way that nurtures you, your mental and physical well-being? And how do you work? There's work can be a way of consuming too, right? We consume our work because it fulfills certain needs. And sometimes it's healthy, and sometimes it can be unhealthy. So, shall we continue? It's 12:08. So we do have 2 more mindfulness trainings, but because the time, perhaps we can bring that into the Dharma sharing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you want to go?
Yes. Okay, so just briefly, and we'll ask for our Dhamma sharing groups to be particularly yielding in terms of the second and the third mindfulness training on true love and true happiness. So we hope that you've touched a kind of inspiration to look at the 5 mindfulness trainings as a kind of guideline to really enrich your life, to be open to your potential, because we are fine just as we are, but we can always improve, right, at the same time. And we know that, especially in the field of education, that the biggest treasure that we can transmit to our students isn't so much the knowledge, but it's the embodiment of our peace, our happiness, our wisdom. And so when we have the chance to explore our actions, what we have been doing in our life, what we have experienced in our life, through this filter, this wisdom filter, it helps us to purify our actions, carry that forward, the essence, the embodiment of our practice, to offer to our family, to our colleagues, to our students. And that's really what they will take away from that interaction.
So these trainings are about cultivating awareness, one step at a time, small steps. It's about the quality of our intention and cultivating a heart that is filled with good intention, with an open heart. And it is action. How do we actually live? And how do we bring these practices into our daily life? How do we keep them alive? Okay, so this afternoon you'll have another opportunity to talk about these trainings in your small Dharma sharing groups, and we encourage you to just keep the dialogue going. We hope that we have planted a seed that you'll water in your Dharma sharing groups.
So it wouldn't be an educator's retreat without homework, right? So we would like to ask you for some homework. And you know awareness of the suffering when your students don't do homework, so please help us. On the back of the free time pie chart, you have your work. This is also a kind of a graphical way that we can explore our work. Well, this is a daily, choose a typical work day schedule, the time that you get to work all the way until you get out. And we'd like you to do the same thing, to ask yourselves the same questions. What, how much, what do you do in your work schedule? Including the rest times, including the eating times, or including the rushing times, including the prep time, including the reaction time, including the downtime. Ask yourself these questions and map it out for yourself so you can see how you spend your day. And the reason we want to be concrete with this exploration is because we want to explore how present is self-care in your workday. Is it from A to Z a burnout and then get home and crash? Or do you have, as Valerie shared, these ways of bringing in self-care, bringing in the breath, bringing in a mindful step, bringing in a pause, a stop, a listening, a bio break? Do you have that in your day? And if you don't, why not? What can we activate? The red part of our trainings, the action part. What can we do if we have this awareness that we're suffering from burnout, we're suffering from an unrealized desire to deeply help our students, our colleagues, even our family, then what is our intention? We are now determined to do what for our better well-being, better self-care, and how will that manifest concretely? That's the action that we're asking you to step forward with, okay? So the question to answer is, how present is self-care in your workday? That's part one of homework. There's another one too.
So going back to the aspiration, inspiration card, right? Everyone have that? So we want to invite you to identify how those qualities that inspire you actually manifest in these 5 mindfulness trainings. So again, this is an invitation to allow the trainings, the practice of the trainings, to punctuate your day. So taking these qualities, whether that's compassion or deep listening, and seeing how they actually fit into these trainings. Where might you practice loving speech or deep listening or true happiness?
Thank you very much for your deep listening and your active engagement, involvement. We'll end here so we have time for a break before lunch after a few announcements.
Thank you.
So please take the time during this retreat.